Bibles to Matthew chapter 14. And I'm not sure where I'm going to start. Taking a different approach on a familiar scripture. And I'm going to read quite a bit of scripture this morning, so just bear with me. I have a thought, and I want to address some things. We have people in our congregation and outside of these church walls. We have people in our lives that really are going through some bad times, have some storms in their life. And sometimes the storms just seem to be more than we can take, more than we can handle. But in reality, they're not more than we can take or handle if we handle in the correct way. And I want to take a look at the disciples and how they handle adverse times, adversity, and storms of life. Not so much in what happened, but in their response to what happened. So I'm going to start back over here on, we're going to start with verse 13 of Matthew chapter 14. Okay, that's where I'm going to start reading. We're going to start with the sermon on verse 22. But I'm going to start right here. It says, when Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, this is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the village and buy themselves victuals. But Jesus said unto them, they did not depart, give ye them to eat. And they said unto him, we have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He said, bring them hither to me. He commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat and were filled. And they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Okay, I want to stop right there for just a minute. When it came time to feed this multitude, the disciples asked Jesus to send them away. It's time for them to go buy them something to eat. You know, they've been out here, there's nothing to eat here. Send them away. Let them go fend for themselves. But Jesus didn't do that. He said, there's no point in sending them away. Just have them, I'm going to have them sit down and bring those fishes and loaves to me, and we're going to feed them. So he has fed the crowd now. They took up the remains of what was given to the crowd, which was more than what they started with in the beginning. Now you would think that this would be, to the multitude, it would be a blessing and an eye-opener as to who Jesus was, but to his disciples especially, it would be a faith-building experience. That's what you would think. And that's what we would think. Of course, we weren't there in their shoes. They're following Jesus on a daily basis. They're seeing miracle after miracle after miracle. And they're standing there beside him, so they feel secure in the presence of Jesus Christ. But then things change just a little bit. So in verse 22, it says, and straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitude away. See, he could have sent them away before he fed them, but he fed them. And he didn't send the multitude away right then. He sent his disciples away. Won't y'all get in the boat, going over to the other side? Basically, is what they're thinking. Well, he's going to catch a ship and meet us over there. Everything's going to be all right. Well, most of these guys, some of these guys were fishermen. They were familiar with the boat. They were familiar with the waters. They were familiar with storms. They knew what to do to be safe in most cases. Well, here you got Jesus sending them away. Get in the boat, go to the other side. And it said, and when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. Now in our Sunday school lesson this morning, it talked about Jesus going out into a desert place to pray. We see Jesus praying often in the Scriptures. And in this case is no different. He has fed 5,000. He has, been teaching them. He's ready for a little downtime. He needs to refresh himself. I'm sure he's thanking his Father for the miracle that was done and for the acceptance of the miracle that was done. But now it's time to send them away. And he sends them away and he's praying. And it says that he was there alone. It says, but the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. Now, that's a very important part. And I'm just going through this piece by piece, because I think we need to realize the point that I'm trying to make here. And this is not an original point, it's been made before. But Jesus sent his disciples away and went up to a mountain to pray. He didn't immediately get in the ship and go across with them. Now we know that God is all-knowing. And we know that Jesus knew that that storm was going to arise. But yet he put his disciples in a boat and said, y'all go across to the other side. And I thought that was kind of fascinating as I studied this. And I read some different opinions and some different commentaries on this, and I would have to agree with what was written in this commentary that I read, that, Jesus before had been in the boat with them on the sea when the storms raged in chapter 8 of Matthew. And he was asleep in the boat. But in chapter 14, he's not in the boat. And he sends them out in the sea, and the storm comes. Well, if you'll remember in chapter 8, they were afraid then too. Jesus was asleep. He was resting in the boat. But they were afraid. These same men that were used to being on the sea, most of them, were afraid of this storm that blew up, and they're in this boat, ship, however you want to say it. They're in this vessel out there on the sea, and it's being tossed to and fro. If any of you's ever been in a storm and been in a boat out on a big body of water, sometimes you take on a little water here and there. I've done that in a bass boat on Lake Gunnersville. Well, no matter what you did, the water was coming in the boat. So, they're scared. They're afraid. But he's got them out there by themselves for a reason. You see, everybody that was in that multitude that came to him probably didn't come for the correct reason. They probably were not there just to hear the master teach. They were probably there for the food. They were probably there for the healing that was going to be done. Some of them probably thought about, you know what, this is the great prophet, the great teacher, the great man that we've heard about. And, what we really need to do is let him be our king, and we'll get away from the wrongs. He'll be our leader, our king, our earthly king. Now, the scripture doesn't tell that in chapter 14. But we know that that's been the theme throughout. You had the scribes and the Pharisees who wanted to get rid of him because he was preaching and teaching something different than they grew up with, something different than they knew. They didn't realize he was the Christ, or they didn't accept the fact that he was the Christ and the new covenant that he brought with him. But his disciples knew who he was, and his disciples were following, and his disciples were put in the ship and sent out to the sea where a storm was coming. So let's finish the scriptures here, and then we'll go on. It says, and in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, be of good cheer. It is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And Peter was come down out of the ship and walked on the water to Jesus. Now, this sermon is not about Jesus walking on the water. It's not about Peter walking on the water. It's about the disciples in the ship. Now, those things did happen because they're in the Scripture. And we're going to touch on them for just a minute. But it said in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to him. Now, I don't know how long this storm had been raging in the sea. But however long it was, here's this group of men who's following Jesus in this boat being tossed about, and they're afraid of the storm and afraid for their life. And Jesus waits till the fourth watch to go out to them. If you remember, when he went and raised Lazarus from the dead, he tarried 3 days before he went. There was a reason. Jesus had a reason. So he goes out, and he's walking on the water, and they're so scared, and they're so obsessed with this storm that they see Jesus coming. Not one of them has the thought, here comes Jesus. They automatically go to the negative. They automatically go to what could be worse than being in the storm. Now there's a ghost walking on the water, coming out to us. I don't know what brought that thought on. But, if I seen somebody, and I'm just saying, I'm like Andy Griffin, I'm just iffing because I ain't been in this situation. But if I seen somebody walking on the water in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the night, I think the first thing I'd do is start praying. I wouldn't be worried about whose ghost it was. But their mind wasn't on Jesus. Their thoughts wasn't on Jesus. Their thoughts was on, what are we going to do in this storm? How can we handle this by ourselves? Now the point I'm trying to make here is today is, when we hit the storms of life, and we will hit the storms of life, just because you're a Christian, just because you're a believer, and even if you're a faithful believer, the best that you could possibly do doesn't mean that you're going to have smooth sailing through life. You're going to get in a boat and you're going to get on the sea, and the storms are going to come. And when they come, instead of being obsessed with the storm and being overcome by the problems that you have, what we really need to do is be praying and seeking God. If they had been praying and seeking Jesus, I believe in my heart that they would have seen Jesus, they would have recognized Jesus, and they would have called out to him. But they didn't call out to him. Jesus called out to them. It says, be not afraid, it's me. And then Peter, old Peter, he's always the one that's got to step up, be first. Well, if it's you, well, let me just read it, the way it said. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, even in his own mind, he's talking to Jesus, seeing him walk on the water. If it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. So he's looking for something here a little more satisfying to himself than calming the sea. He wants to get out and walk on the water. Jesus said, come on. So, to show that he does have faith, and to show that he does recognize the voice of Jesus, he gets out of the boat and starts walking out toward Jesus. And of course, he gets his eyes off of Jesus and back on the storm. And he's probably, when he stepped out of the boat and walked on the water, probably thought, man, I'm doing good. Look at me. I'm like Jesus. And then he seen the storm and thought, I'm sinking. I better call out. So he does what they should have done in the boat. Lord, save me. And the scripture says that, but when he saw that the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, save, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore did thou doubt? You see, he called out to Jesus when he's on the water, just him and Jesus. He's done left the boat. Doesn't say anywhere in the scripture that after they've spoken to Jesus that they cry out to him for help. The only account we have here is that Peter said, hey, let me walk on the water. That'd be cool. And he gets out, gets exactly what he asked for, and he even gets scared when he's doing the miracle that God let him do, which is walk on the water. And then he began to sink. Now, I'm going to go full circle back to Jesus told him to get in the boat and go out into the sea. As I studied this and read this, I come across something that just really struck home with me, because I know that I've talked to a couple of people here in the church and some people outside the church that are really, really struggling with things in their life. And part of the things they struggle with are being persuaded by peer pressure to do something different than what they know is correct to do. And they struggle with it. And it is a big struggle. If you got a problem in your life and you're having all of these people that's trying to get you to do this and do that, they got their own little things that they recommend that you do to solve your problem. Although most of them probably never been in that situation, don't know anything about the problem, they always got an antidote for you. And you can follow all of those antidotes that you want to, but what you're really supposed to be doing is calling on Jesus, because you got a problem. And you're in the storms of life. But you can't see past the problem to see Jesus. These men were sent out into the sea for what reason? Because they didn't need to have the persuasion and the temptation of the agenda of the multitude of people that Jesus was fixing to send away. Think about it. Jesus is through teaching. He's fed 5,000. You know the crowd's happy. You know how the excitement goes through a crowd when something good has happened. If his disciples had been mingling with this crowd, can you imagine the talk? Man, if we could just be with Jesus all the time, if he could be our king, if he could fight the Romans for us, he could get rid of the struggles that we have. He could heal all of our sick. We don't have to work anymore. He just gives us food. And all we have to do is sit and listen to him teach. Well, that wasn't God's agenda. It wasn't Jesus' purpose for being here. His purpose was to tell the world about God and about God's plan of salvation. So Jesus put them in a ship, sent them out in the sea. He sent them so far out in the sea and waited so long while they were out in the sea, to the fourth watch, that there was no one else in the sea that could help them. There was no human help available. They were on their own, stranded in the midst of a storm, and they had to depend on Jesus. The only hope they had. Sometimes we're in the struggles of life so deep that we can't see anything except the storm, and we forget to depend on Jesus. We depend on the human race. We depend on advice. We depend on other people praying for us. We depend on doctors. We depend on friends. We depend on relatives. We depend on everything, but somehow or another we neglect the one thing that we should depend on, and that's Jesus. If these men had been in the boat, of course it's a scary situation. The boat's going to sink, they think. We're all going to drown because we can't swim across this sea. If at some point their mind had landed on prayer, if their mind had focused on the faith and waited on Jesus. Another point that's brought out here is the fact that the very thing they were afraid of is the thing that Jesus used to get to the boat. They were afraid of the water. They were afraid of drowning. Jesus just walks across like it was pavement. Walks out to the boat. Just to show them that the very thing they feared was nothing to fear. We're going to have struggles in life, but we got to depend on Jesus. I want to read Matthew 8, start with verse 23. Let me get over here to it. I want to show you the difference here. Matthew 8, verse 23. And when he was entered into a ship, his disciples followed him, and behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves, but he was asleep. And his disciples came to him and woke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. And he said unto them, Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. But the men marveled, saying, What manner of this? What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea do obey him? So they've already had an encounter with the storm on the sea, with Jesus in the boat. And guess what? Where did they turn? Jesus is laying right there in the boat with them. They turn to Jesus. They can see Jesus. They know he's there. They turn to Jesus. They get out on the sea without Jesus, and they don't even give Jesus a thought. All they can see is the storm. All they can think about is the ghost coming. All they can see is the death and the peril that's going to overtake them. It says that Peter said, Lord, save me. It says that Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou little faith, wherefore dost thou doubt? And when they were come in the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. You see, it's when they're in the boat with Jesus, they have all kind of faith. But when Jesus is not in the boat, they fall. We got to keep Jesus in the boat. And you do that by being faithful, by relying on Jesus through prayer life, through your studies, and through waiting to see what God's going to do. You know, Cindy told me yesterday, you have zero patience. And I know y'all heard me say that before. And she's right, I don't have any patience. It would be hard to be in the boat in a storm and sit there patiently waiting on Jesus to walk out and get you when you don't know he's coming. But it's not hard to be talking to God while you're going through the storm. You see, that's one thing that Jesus done for us when he died on the cross. We have a direct line to God the Father. And even more so than that, Jesus sits on his right hand interceding for us. He may not be in the boat, he might not be in the next room, but he's on his throne, watching over us, interceding for us. And it says, of a truth, thou art the Son of God. Once again, Jesus performs a miracle and mankind believes. Now let me show you how mankind continues on. He just fed 5,000. He just saved his disciples, which nobody but the disciples and Jesus knows about this because they're out in the middle of the sea by themselves. All right. And then it says, and when they were gone over, this is after they've confessed that Jesus is truly the Son of God. And when they were gone over, they came into the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place had knowledge of him, they sent out into all the country round about and brought unto him all that were diseased, and besought him that he might only touch the hem of his garment. As many as touched were made perfectly whole. You see, Jesus' mission, as they brought out in the Sunday school lesson this morning, was not a healing mission. He healed a lot of people. He could have healed a lot more people. He had compassion on people. He wanted to heal these people. But nobody saw him for the Son of God. They all saw him for another purpose. For what they could get from him. Not realizing that the one thing they needed from him, they could get if they would only believe and confess. Let's don't let the storms of life put us out on the sea by ourselves to test our faith in Jesus Christ when we can test our faith before the storm gets so bad. You know what? In Alabama, we have tornadoes. They come and go. We have them every year. Nowadays, we get warnings, oh, we're having a tornado. So, everybody go to your shelter. Everybody in a safe place. Same story. You could just about, everybody in here could just about recite the news when it comes on about a tornado. What you're supposed to do, where you're supposed to go, where the tornado's at, which direction the tornado's going, how much damage it's leaving behind it, what you can expect. You get full warning of that storm. And how many people don't heed that warning? How many people during that tornado pray not only for themselves but for others that are in the path, and pray for those who have already experienced the tornado? Well, sometimes in the storms of life, we don't have that warning. These men in that boat, they didn't have any warning. If they'd have thought there was going to be a big storm, they would have probably said somewhere in the scripture that they would have said, well, wait a minute, Jesus, it's fixing to storm. We don't get caught out in the middle of that sea in a storm. But they didn't know, but Jesus knew. And not only did Jesus know, but he tested their faith by waiting till the fourth watch and then going out to where they had lost all hope. You see, when we feel like all hope is gone, there's still one hope, and that's Jesus. Amen. So put your faith and your trust in Jesus, and don't lose sight in the storm. Stay close. We have a hymn of invitation.